So it's being reported right now that George St-Pierre is going to announce his retirement tomorrow, that being Thursday. A tweet from Ariel Helwani says George St-Pierre will officially announce his retirement from MMA tomorrow morning at a press conference in Montreal. Multiple sources told ESPN. GSP had hoped to secure a super fight with Khabib. Once that didn't materialize, he decided it was time to walk away more shortly. He also added on the news of GSP's announcement was first reported by Ben Baudouin RDS, which I believe is a French Canadian station up in Montreal. So sorry if I mispronounced the French name incorrectly, but that is who initially reported it. So to go to the ESPN report on here, it just kind of goes into further detail. I'm going to approach this in two ways. So first off, I'm going to make the assumption that George St. Pierre is honestly going to retire and that this is the last we've seen of him, that the Michael Bisping fight's the last time he's ever going to fight. Personally, do I suspect that he's never going to fight again? I have a feeling he might, but I'll get to that later. So first, just to talk about what George St. Pierre has done in his career, I think it's worth going through his record just to see how impressive it was. One of the first things that stood out to me on his 26-2 record is that though he does have two losses, both of the guys who beat him, he ended up getting another shot at them and beating both of them. So of all the guys he's fought, no one he's never fought someone who he can't beat or who he hasn't beaten. So even though he has a couple losses on his record, he avenged both of them, and that's pretty impressive. So just to go down the line, a lot of these names are actually fairly big names. So his debut was against Ivan Menjivar, who he defeated. Menjivar, I believe, I don't know if he's fighting anymore, but I know he was fighting at 145 at one point. Like he fought Uriah Faber, so not the biggest guy, but that's still a guy who's done a lot in the sport. Some other notable names: Thomas Denny, he beat in his fourth fight. Pete Spratt, who I believe is still going. Carl Parisian, Jay Haran, had the loss to Matt Hughes by armbar, which he later avenged. Strasser, not really familiar with him. Beat Mayhem Miller, beat Frank Trigg, beat Sean Chirk, beat BJ Penn. Got that win over Matt Hughes. The famous loss to Matt Serra. Now, at this point, you'd think he might get an immediate title shot. That's not the case. He actually had to fight a couple more times before he got another shot at it. So he then beat Josh Koscheck, beat Matt Hughes again. So not only did he avenge his loss, but then he won the next two fights just to let it be known that he was better than Matt Hughes. Avenged the loss to Matt Serra, beat John Fitch, beat BJ Penn in what was probably the first big high-profile champ versus champ fight. BJ Penn was the 155 champ, moving up to 170 to fight for the 170 title against GSP. BJ was known to have a guard that was practically impassable. Not only was he taken down in that fight by GSP multiple times, but GSP was able to pass the guard too. So it was just a completely dominant performance. BJ Penn's corner threw in the towel at the end of the fourth round. At UFC 100, he fought Thiago Alves, defeated him, beat Dan Hardy, beat Josh Koscheck again, beat Jake Shields at a time when Jake Shields was tearing through everyone in Strikeforce, and everyone thought that Shields might actually be a better fighter. Shields had a good wrestling and jiu-jitsu background. GSP would wrestle, and though he wasn't really known for his submissions, had pretty solid top control and was able to pass the guard when needed. So there were some questions. Hey, Jake Shields is able to submit a lot of these top guys. If GSP tries to play his game against Jake, is Jake going to catch him in a guillotine or catch him in something else? And the answer to that was no. Jake Shields was defeated by George St. Pierre. Then Carlos Condit. That fight happened about a year and a half after the Jake Shields fight. GSP suffered a major injury. Came back against Condit and got rocked in the middle of the fight. Ended up recovering, winning all the other 4 rounds. Pretty good win there. Then fought Nick Diaz, defeated him. Again, there was kind of that question. GSP likes to take everyone down. What happens when he gets in someone's guard? And the guy who's on bottom is Nick Diaz, who's very submission savvy. GSP was never really in trouble in that fight on the ground when he brought it there. Ended up winning a dominant decision. Had the fight with Johnny Hendricks, which was a split decision. Now, a lot of people think that decision went the wrong way. I've watched the fight multiple times. I think, though, if it was like scored as a whole, where if you were just saying, all right, who won the 25 minutes, you'd have to give it to Johnny Hendricks. By the 10-9 scoring system, I do believe that GSP won 3 of the rounds. So take that for what it is. But he ended up retiring, so to speak, or at least like taking a large break on top. Didn't come back for another 4 years, but then came back against Michael Bisping at middleweight for a middleweight title fight. Won that fight. A couple of weeks later, decided to give up his title. He was talking about having some issues with colitis, and he felt like he wasn't really feeling too good at 185 and wasn't going to actually defend the title. So at least he did the honorable thing there and not holding up the division any longer than he already had by jumping in when Robert Whitaker was already the interim champ. But I can understand from his perspective, you haven't fought in 4 years. It's tough when you haven't fought in a while. I mean, we just saw Cain Velasquez take 2.5 years off, and get knocked out by Francis Ngannou within 30 seconds. So for him to fight a title fight after 4 years off and not only get the win but get a finish over Michael Bisping, that's very impressive. And it looks like, though he did have the issues with colitis, he was looking to cut weight, cut down to 155 potentially, and fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's been talking a lot about how he wants legacy fights at this point, that he's not as interested in going for big money fights like, say, like a Nate Diaz or a Nick Diaz. He's looking more for fights that cement his legacy. No, as we just saw on his record, he has a great legacy as it is. I think at this point, if you're going to look at a legacy fight for GSP, it's either got to be someone who's a current champ right now, like a Tyron Woodley. I guess Khabib kind of fits that mold. Or it could be a guy in Anderson Silva who we'd long wanted to see the fight between the two of them, and I think GSP matches up fairly well with them. But it looks like at this point, that's probably not going to happen. If what he's saying is true, he's retired, he's done. So the Anderson Silva fight's not going to happen. The Tyron Woodley fight's not going to happen. Conor fight never really should have happened, but that's not going to happen. Khabib fight not going to happen, and that's okay. I mean, as the game moves along, there's always going to be guys who are going to fill the championship roles. There's always going to be a lightweight champion. There's always going to be a welterweight champion. There's always going to be a middleweight champion. And anytime that there's a champion, people might say, hey, how would that guy match up against a former champion or a guy like GSP who never lost his titles? He won the welterweight title and then relinquished it. Or he won against Johnny Hendricks and relinquished the welterweight title. He won against Michael Bisping and relinquished the middleweight title without being defeated. So I feel like there's always going to be a question regardless of who fills the spots at welterweight, lightweight, and middleweight. So for him, he's going to have to retire at some point. There might be some questions regardless at that point. No issue with him doing it now. No issue with him doing it later. Now, whether or not I believe this is it for him, that's hard to say. The last time he took that huge break, there's a lot of interest in it from Canada that seemed to drop off. And when he ended up fighting against Michael Bisping, there's a lot of interest that kind of sparked back up there. I think if the Canadian market starts to get a little bit stale after a little while, they may be willing to pay whatever GSP is asking for and give him one of these big fights. It doesn't seem like he has any interest in fighting Tyron Woodley. Maybe he's hoping that a guy who he matches up better with at welterweight is going to knock off Woodley so he can jump back in then. I don't know that Usman's going to be that guy. Maybe Covington's that guy. I don't know that Covington's going to win the title, though. As far as lightweight goes, if he's not making a deal with Khabib now, maybe part of the issue is that Tony Ferguson is a better matchup for Khabib as far as what the fans want. And there's the Conor rematch looming. So if you're the UFC, the next two fights for Khabib, if all goes well, as you would hope that it would be Tony Ferguson now, hope that Conor beats Cerrone, and then you have Conor versus Khabib as a rematch. So that pushes it pretty far down the line, especially with Khabib not wanting to take the first fight until November. So I can see why they wouldn't make the GSP fight right now. So maybe GSP waits out Khabib. If Khabib gets the next two wins, maybe GSP pushes his name back into the mix when he's 38. But we'll see if a match comes up where it would make sense for GSP to pop in. Maybe someone gets injured and there's an opening and he wants to just step back in. But if not, if he decides this is it, perfectly respectable career, arguably one of the best of all time. If he does come back, I don't know that he has anything more to prove in my mind, but if he wants to do it and he wants to get a huge payday, he's earned the right to do that as well.